3 days after open-heart surgery, I learned something that no surgeon's scalpel could ever fix. It wasn't my heart that broke open. It was everything else. I was sitting in a wheelchair outside St. Catherine's Medical Center, a hospital I knew better than most people realized. The late afternoon sun reflected off the glass walls, warm and indifferent. A nurse tucked a thin blanket around my legs and smiled politely, the way people do when they're already thinking about their next patient. "You're cleared to go home, Mr. Caldwell," she said. "Do you have someone picking you up?" I hesitated. Of course I did. I always had. My son. So I nodded and pulled out my phone. My fingers were still stiff. Not weak, just slow. Each movement felt like it belonged to someone older than I remembered being. I typed carefully. "Hey Noah, they're discharging me. Would you be able to drive me home?" I stared at the screen, watching the message sit there quietly. Delivered. I smiled to myself. He'd be busy. He always was. But he'd come. He was my son. The reply came less than 30 seconds later. "You're embarrassing me, Dad. Just get an Uber." The smile faded. I reread it once, then again. Maybe he meant it jokingly. Noah had always had a sharp tongue. A surgeon's confidence, they called it. I adjusted the blanket on my lap and typed back. "I just had heart surgery. I can barely walk." The 3 dots disappeared. Then came the message that stayed with me long after the painkillers wore off. "That's not my problem. I'm not your chauffeur. I have real responsibilities." My chest tightened not from the incision, but from something deeper. I looked around. A middle-aged man hugged his father nearby, tears running freely down both their faces. A young woman pushed her mother toward the parking garage, laughing at something on her phone. I swallowed and typed one last time. "I just need help getting home, son." The response arrived instantly. "Stop being needy. And don't show up around my colleagues looking like that. People already think I come from nothing." I let the phone drop into my lap. Nothing. That word echoed louder than any monitor beep I'd heard in the last week. I had built everything from nothing. I had built him from nothing. The nurse cleared her throat. "Sir, I'm fine," I said, though my voice didn't agree. "Just waiting." She nodded and walked away. I sat there alone, staring at the hospital entrance where Noah passed through every day in tailored suits and polished shoes. The same entrance I had once walked through as a Nuna. The same building he believed represented his success, never suspecting it had once represented mine. He didn't know. I had made sure of that. For 8 years, I lived quietly in a small Iowa town. I drove a rusted pickup with a cracked windshield. I wore the same jackets year after year. I told people I did odd jobs. I let my son believe his father had peaked decades ago. Not because I was ashamed, because I wanted to know if he was. I still remember when Noah was 6 years old, sitting on a cold concrete floor beside me while I repaired a busted water heater in our first property. He handed me wrenches like they were treasure. "Dad," he asked, eyes bright, "are we building something important?" I smiled back then. I really did. Yes, I told him. Something that lasts. At 22, I'd bought a condemned duplex with borrowed money and blind courage. By 30, I owned a block. By 45, banks stopped asking questions and started asking favors. Caldwell Holdings grew quietly, relentlessly. Office towers, shopping centers, medical complexes. When I sold the company, my name barely made the papers. That was intentional. I wanted anonymity. I wanted truth. Instead, I got this. Another vibration hit my phone. Honestly, Dad, sometimes I wish you'd just stayed in that little town and stopped bothering me. I closed my eyes. He had no idea that the little townhouse was a choice. That the man he was ashamed of could buy the entire street. He stood on without blinking. But wealth has a way of revealing people, especially when it's absent. I picked up my phone one more time. Not to text my son, to make a different call. Victor Hale answered on the first ring. "Brandon, how did the surgery go?" "It went fine," I said, "but I need a ride." There was a pause. He knew me well enough to hear the change in my voice. "Where are you?" "St. Catherine's." Another pause. Then, quietly, "Do you want me to bring the car?" I looked at the glass doors of the hospital, at the reflection of an old man in a worn jacket, hunched slightly, underestimated completely. "Yes," I said, "bring it." When I hung up, something settled inside me. Not anger, resolution. Because sometimes the moment someone shows you who they are is the moment you finally stop pretending to be someone else. While I waited for Victor, I stared at the hospital doors and thought about the first time Noah ever called me a hero. He was 8. I had just finished renovating a small grocery plaza, and no one else wanted. The roof leaked. The wiring was ancient. Everyone said I was throwing money into a grave. The night we turned the lights on for the first time, Noah stood beside me in the parking lot. The sign flickered once, then stayed glowing. "Dad," he whispered, squeezing my hand, "you fix everything." Back then, I believed that included us. Caldwell Holdings didn't grow overnight. It grew because I never slept. I missed birthdays. I missed school plays. I told myself it was temporary, that one day he'd understand why I worked the way I did. By the time he entered medical school, I owned more commercial property than I could personally visit in a year. Hospitals, office towers, entire blocks of downtown real estate, including St. Catherine's. When I sold the portfolio for more money than I ever imagined possible, I expected to feel triumph. Instead, I felt tired. Noah was already becoming distant, his tone sharper, his patience thinner. Success wrapped around him like armor. Somewhere along the way, humility slipped off. So I made a decision that most men in my position would call insane. I stepped away. No interviews, no board seats, no philanthropy dinners. I liquidated quietly and moved to a smaller town where nobody cared who I was. I drove a 12-year-old pickup. I wore work boots to the grocery store. When Noah asked what I did with the company, I told him I retired comfortably. That was true, but not complete. I wanted to know if he valued the man or the myth. At first, he visited. Then he started making comments. "You could try dressing better. People judge. Dad, you don't understand how reputation works." Each sentence chipped away at something I had built far more carefully than buildings. Respect. The final shift happened 2 years ago at a medical gala. I showed up in a simple blazer. Noah introduced me as my father. He used to work construction. Used to construction. I didn't correct him. I watched him laugh nervously when someone asked follow-up questions. That night, driving back to Iowa, I realized something painful. My son didn't just misunderstand me. He was ashamed of me, and today, sitting outside the hospital he once believed represented his success alone, I understood the full cost of my experiment. The phantom would arrive any minute, and with it, the end of pretending. Because some truths don't need to be shouted. They only need to be seen. The Rolls-Royce Phantom doesn't make noise when it arrives. It announces itself through silence. Conversations near the hospital entrance softened as the black car curved into the circular drive. Its surface reflected the skyline like dark glass. Even from a distance, it carried authority. Victor stepped out first. Same posture, same calm precision. He hadn't changed much since the days we closed nine-figure deals over black coffee and blueprints. He walked toward me without hesitation. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, extending his hand. "Not Brandon, not old friend. Mr. Caldwell. Loud enough for the valet, loud enough for the nurses, loud enough for anyone watching. I was beginning to think you'd never call," he added quietly. "I was beginning to think so too," I replied. He helped me to my feet. My chest tightened from the movement, but I didn't show it. The chauffeur opened the rear door, and that's when I saw him. Noah stood near the entrance steps, frozen mid-stride, car keys dangling from his hand. He had been heading toward the parking garage, toward his evening plans, toward a life carefully curated. His eyes moved from the car to Victor, to me. Confusion first, then recognition, then something close to fear. The nurse who had discharged me looked between us, suddenly unsure how to behave. A security guard straightened instinctively. Respect shifts quickly when context changes. Noah took a step forward. That I didn't answer. Victor steadied me as I slid into the leather seat. The interior smelled faintly of cedar and quiet power. The door closed with a muted finality. Through the tinted glass, I watched my son pull out his phone. His fingers moved fast, searching, verifying, disbelieving. It wouldn't take long. My name wasn't splashed across tabloids, but it lived in financial archives, property records, acquisition reports. Caldwell Holdings had left fingerprints across the Midwest, including this hospital. Noah's shoulders sank as whatever he found confirmed what he was seeing. The car began to move. Halfway down the drive, my phone vibrated. "Dad, what is this?" Another vibration. "Is this some kind of joke?" Then another. "Brandon Caldwell. Caldwell Holdings. That's you." I leaned back against the headrest and closed my eyes. For 8 years, I had lived quietly to measure the weight of my son's character. It turned out, wealth wasn't what revealed him. Its absence was. The Phantom turned onto the main road. Chicago traffic swallowed us. Behind us, a brilliant surgeon stood on hospital steps, realizing the man he called a liability had once owned the ground beneath his feet. And ahead of me, for the first time in years, I wasn't pretending to be smaller than I was. Not anymore. By the time I reached my penthouse downtown, Noah had called 11 times. I didn't answer. Victor poured 2 glasses of water and set one beside me. He didn't ask questions. He'd spent 25 years watching me read markets, negotiate takeovers, and walk away from billion-dollar offers without blinking. But this was different. "This about your son?" he asked finally. "Yes," he nodded once. "Are you going to forgive him?" I didn't respond immediately. My phone buzzed again. "Dad, please call me." Another. "I didn't know." Another. "I'm sorry." I placed the phone face down on the table. "That's the problem," I said quietly. He didn't need to know. Victor understood. Respect isn't supposed to depend on a balance sheet. That night, I replayed his words in my mind. "You're a liability. You're embarrassing. People think I come from nothing." Nothing. The irony was almost poetic. I had come from nothing. That was the part I was proud of. The next morning, I called my attorneys. Not in anger, in clarity. Within weeks, the paperwork was ready. The majority of my remaining liquid assets would be transferred into the newly established Caldwell Foundation, affordable housing initiatives, medical grants for low-income families, trade education programs. Every dollar redirected toward people who understood the value of opportunity. When the lawyers hesitated, I stopped them. "Yes," I said, "all of it. And your son?" One of them asked carefully. "My son," I replied, already assigned my worth. News travels fast in financial circles. It travels even faster when a retired billionaire resurfaces after nearly a decade of silence. I scheduled a press conference. If Noah valued reputation above relationship, then reputation would be the stage. On the day of the announcement, cameras lined the ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel. Reporters whispered, speculated, wondered why a man who vanished would return. I stepped to the podium. Flashes lit the room. I spoke about business briefly, about stepping away, about perspective. Then I read the messages. Word for word, the room shifted. When I announced that my entire estate would fund the foundation, leaving no inheritance behind, silence fell heavier than applause ever could. From the back of the room, I saw him. Noah, pale, disheveled, not the confident surgeon anymore. Just a son realizing that one careless afternoon had rewritten his future. Afterward, he tried to approach me. "Dad, please." I raised my hand gently. "You had 8 years," I said. Yesterday was simply the proof. Security guided him away, not roughly, just firmly. I felt no triumph, only stillness. Some decisions are emotional, others are structural. This one was both, because sometimes the hardest lesson a man learns is that love without respect isn't love at all. 6 months later, I stood in a field in northern Illinois where 32 homes now stood in neat, quiet rows. 6 months is enough time for headlines to fade. It's enough time for anger to cool. It's enough time for a man to discover whether he made a decision out of ego or conviction. Children ran across fresh concrete sidewalks. Volunteers carried boxes into doorways. A woman in her 30s held a set of keys like they were made of glass, afraid they might disappear if she gripped them too tightly. The first Caldwell Foundation housing community was complete. Not luxury, not flashy, but solid, safe, permanent. I watched a young father kneel in the driveway of his new home, whispering something to his daughter. She laughed and wrapped her arms around his neck. I felt something settle in my chest, something no acquisition or closing dinner had ever given me. This Victor approached with 2 cups of coffee. "No regrets?" he asked. "Only one," I said. "That I didn't do this sooner." He studied me for a moment. "Have you heard from him?" I shook my head. After the press conference, Noah tried for weeks. Emails, letters, messages through mutual contacts. I didn't respond. Not because I hated him, but because I understood something he didn't yet. Consequences are not revenge. They are boundaries. I still think about him sometimes, walking hospital corridors, performing surgeries, carrying a name that now carries weight in ways he never expected. I hope he's learned something. I hope one day he understands that what I wanted wasn't gratitude. It wasn't admiration. It was simple dignity. That afternoon, as families moved into homes funded by money that would have once sat in private accounts, I realized something quietly profound. Legacy is not what you leave behind for your bloodline. It's what remains standing after you're gone. I lost a son who measured worth by perception, but I gained clarity. I gained purpose. And in the end, when the sun began to set behind those new rooftops, I felt lighter than I had in years, because the man my son was ashamed of finally stopped being ashamed of nothing at all.